If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. You pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that's a blow made.
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing.
Stand up and take on the greed and corruption of the ruling class of this country.
The billionaire class has been taking everything, and the working class has been left scraping, paycheck to paycheck, just trying to survive.
The police department, the FBI, the CIA, those are gangs. You know what I mean? The correctional office. America is the biggest gang in the world.
A solidarity which fears not foreign invasion, because it is bringing all the workers to the point when they will say to their masters, go and do your own killing. We have done it long enough for you.
It's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it.
Guys, gals, and in-between pals, welcome back to the Left 4 Dead podcast, that radical left-wing show your crazy conservative uncle warned you about. As always, my name is Dane Snudden. I am one of your co-hosts, and I am joined by my other co-hosts, the Chaos Queen herself, Emma Embers.
And my cat.
And her cat. And fresh off of his graduation and commencement speaking, James Harris.
Yeah, I still can't believe they trusted me with the microphone, but yes, I'm graduated. It feels good, and soon I will start editing this show. So
yes, we'll the Left 4 Dead industrial complex will start stronger.
But we are joined communist industrial complex because we do this for no money. But we have a guest today.
We do have a very special guest today. Jon Shelton, welcome to the Left 4 Dead podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Jon Shelton is a professor and chair of democracy and justice studies at UWGB, author of The Education Myth, How Human Capital Trumped Social Democracy, president of the local chapter of the American Federation of Teachers, and candidate for District 4 for City Council coming up here in April. Jon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, and I assure you there were no quid pro quos in terms of James's graduation.
However, seeing you without the hat really made you stand out, which was cool because I was like, "Hey, I know that person." It took me 10 minutes to find Katya. So
yeah, I don't wear
professor hair.
I don't like the graduation hats, and I think I had one at one point when I got my did my dissertation, did my PhD, and. I think the first time I was doing commencement here, I was like, nah, I'm just not going to wear the hat. And and turns out my life has been pretty much the same. But and Dane, one thing I want to add is I'm actually president of the state federation.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yes, lot going on these days.
Yes, wow, yes, very very busy.
But thanks for having me, y'all. This is fun.
For sure. Yeah, we're glad to have you. We plan on having every candidate for city council on, so that'll be awesome.
All the progressive ones. I don't think Grant and Nick want to come
on. But Jon, we like to start every episode we have with the guest kind of learning more about our guest, their kind of political background, organizing background, that type of thing, and spend as much time as you need to kind of go into that. We all started very right-wing and shifted, so it's kind of interesting to hear people's stories.
Yeah, well, it's a great question to start with. So I started, I grew up in Mississippi. I probably mentioned that in a few of my classes, if you'll remember that. But I moved when I was like 15 or 16, and I can still remember in ninth grade. I guess it was a geography class, some kind of social studies class. I think it was geography, and I had this teacher who was like I don't know if this name means anything to y'all, but like a Jack Kemp Republican. This was back in the 90s when Republicans, the craziest thing they did was like pushing for a flat tax.
Yeah.
And so this guy, I can still remember his name. His name was Morris Hunter. That doesn't sound like a Southern conservative. But he was kind of a Jack Kemp conservative. He was really into the flat tax and this kind of stuff, and relatively smart guy. I mean, at least from my perspective as a ninth grader. And I remember he had us do this political survey where it was like he was gonna ask you your position on a lot of different topics, and then was kind of gonna grade you out. Are you a liberal? Are you a conservative? And this is Mississippi, right? A place where we still prayed in the middle of like school, right? In a public school, like that happened. Yeah. Where there was a federal holiday called King/Lee Day in Mississippi. All right. Think about that. That's Martin Luther King, but in Mississippi, they did not like being forced to celebrate Martin Luther King. So the state combined it with Robert E. Lee. Okay. So that's the context I'm living in.
Yeah.
And I remember, I filled out, I was very interested in a lot of that stuff, a lot of the topics, and I filled it out, and I got the paper back, and it said, I can't remember the exact terms. It was basically like the equivalent of extremely liberal. And I was like, and I can still remember, I was like, no, like I thought I was conservative. It turns out I wasn't conservative, because I believe that people should have the basic things they need to survive, and also people should have individual freedoms and not have religious beliefs dictate their social mores and what they can do. And so from that point, it really was kind of like that's the last time I've ever even considered myself a conservative. Like it was in high school, so I didn't really like change identities necessarily, but got into reading a lot of social theory. Had a philosophy teacher in high school and did an independent study, and he was very much a conservative. So we had a lot of kind of back and forth. At that time, I was, getting really into like a lot of leftist thinkers. I remember we read some Karl Marx and kind of talked about it. And then, I was the kid in high school who was wearing the like Rage Against the Machine.
Oh, hell yeah.
Shirts and got to college and found people who were really into like social justice activism, and kind of went from there. But I think what's interesting about kind of where I am now is I still have all the same beliefs in terms of, I really truly believe that people deserve economic rights, like full stop. Reproductive justice, obviously, building inclusive communities. I mean, these are things that I've done here in the city, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But I think what's interesting is like, as I've gotten more into kind of institutional places, like obviously union leadership, Cities Equal Rights Commission, and now running for office, I've also gotten quite a bit more pragmatic about getting things done. And some of the political figures that I really admire in this country are people who were able to organize folks around making changes, even if at first they seemed incremental, but then, setting up, bigger fights down the road. And I think that's really important when we think about how to do things. Like there are moral purities that we have. And then, again, we'll get more into this, but like, I think about housing here in Green Bay. I never thought I would be like siding with developers, but like people need housing, right? Yeah. And so at the end of the day, it doesn't always matter. Ideological purity doesn't matter as much as like getting things done to make your community around you better for people, like tangibly and concretely better.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true, especially, and we're going to get into more of the kind of Green Bay, situation issues, whatever you want to call it, but
the situationship we have here in Green Bay.
Yeah, I really like your point about pragmatism, because it really feels like, especially on the left, we have a whole ton of little different groups that disagree with each other slightly and fail each other's purity tests and just
not the left. The left has never been known for that, James.
We get like all these purity tests that nobody else can pass, and then we accomplish nothing. And yeah, I think perfect is the enemy of pretty good. I think the saying goes. A couple other things though. First, Rage Against the Machine. I still find it funny and ironic that Paul Ryan is a Rage Against the Machine fan, but
yeah, he's on the watching machine.
Well, when you strip out the political context, I mean, the songs are bangers,
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, you're just listening to a guitar track at that point, but
the drums are pretty good too.
Well, it sounds like you, like most of us, started on the right to some degree and then kind of moved over, but it sounds like you're a little bit different. Like you realize one day you have like a natural tendency toward leftist politics, and you're like, well, if I'm a leftist, I better learn about it.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I didn't have the vocabulary to talk about any of that stuff, but I mean, I also I have I have figures in my family who are conservative, but you also have to remember that, I have in my family, two of my most formative influences were union members. And so my grandfather, even in Mississippi, we don't think about this as a union town or a union place, but he was a union steel worker, worked in Memphis for much of his life. He's still alive, actually. He's 98, but most hardworking person I've ever met, and union member. And then one of my most important mentors was my uncle, who was a union teamster, who was actually really into progressive politics. I mean, he's probably the only long haul trucker that religiously listened to NPR. And so just wanted to learn about the world, and always had very similar sensibilities. And so, I kind of had those formative influences in my life, that kind of led me away from, to me, it was just kind of common sense that no, we have to kind of take care of each other, and conservative politics leads us to a place where that's not really possible. So I would say that's true. It was learning the vocabulary, but also learning, more so how things worked. I mean, actually, I think even if you're the most ardent capitalist possible, you should read Marx's Capital, because it gives you a very important understanding of how capitalism works. Right? I'm not saying that the capitalists out there should be learning how to do it better, but it actually does teach you how it works. And even if you, again, are a capitalist, understanding labor relationships is very, very important. I say this to my students, no one is employed unless it's, a charity or public sector or something that's different. But if you're working in the private sector in a for-profit company, that company understands its relationship to you as paying you less than the labor that you contribute. They have to. There's no other way for capitalism to work. And Marx, as a social scientist, helps us understand that. So, so sorry, that's a bit of a tangent, but yes, it was about finding the vocabulary, but also learning more about how things work.
I think, learning how things work is that was a big thing for me. And a saying that I always hear is, leftists typically understand capitalism better than people on the right. And it's with a lot of stuff. Same thing with religion, anti-theists typically understand it more than theists, and that type of thing, which I always find kind of interesting. Emma?
Yeah. I was just checking to make sure the cat wasn't attacking the pride flag again. So pivoting back to the Green Bay stuff, one thing that's kind of been becoming more and more of a sort of passion of mine is dealing with the ICE related stuff, and especially since so much of it is targeting people that are explicitly Green Bay. We have a very large Latino population, especially on the east side. We have a large enough Somali population compared to other places I've lived. Yep. And so my concern, as soon as that whole Cinnabon thing happened, with, as other people I know have started taking to calling her the Cinnabitch, it's kind of driven a big focus back onto us, especially with Mayor Gingrich standing out. Everybody pretty much knows he's a Democrat, even though it's a nonpartisan thing. And so him standing with the Somali community, surrounded by other people that identify as Democrats, like Ahmad.
I was there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't sure how much you explicitly identify as a Democrat versus just a lefter.
I do identify as a Democrat. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So then, it's basically just, and of course, none of the Republican identifying people are going to stand up for that, because they're on the side of dealing with those people groups. So, do you have any concerns? Because I feel like it's a 60-40 situation right now, where it's 60% chance that ICE finally actually openly invades Green Bay the way they've done other cities, because it's a perfect flashpoint now that we're in the news nationally for the Somali incident that they're trying to drum up. Is that a concern of yours that you may have?
Well, I mean, I've been concerned about that for over a year, right? A lot of people. And one of the things I'm really proud of, I just want to say this as an aside, in addition to being at that press conference and speaking on behalf of the Equal Rights Commission, And I think to some extent an ambassador of UW Green Bay, because I think we've got so many Somali students.
Yeah.
AFT Wisconsin at our last convention declared ourselves a sanctuary union. And I'm really proud of that because I think, like 20 years from now, 40 years from now, whatever, when, y'all are my age basically, and I'm significantly older, I think people are going to ask kind of where we were and what we were doing at this time. And I want to be able to say that like I was on the right side of history. I mean, I want to say that with everything, but this is a deeply moral question, and it's very important that we all take a stand. So yes, I'm worried about that. But I'll tell you, Emma, like in some ways a better question is like what we can do to protect our friends and neighbors. And so, I think we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the thing I'll say is Donald Trump is historically unpopular for a president. And by the way, I predicted this. Y'all can go back and look at stuff that I wrote a year ago. Trump was never going to do anything for the working people of this country, and the vote against Trump was really the vote for Trump was really a vote against the status quo, which is an economic reality that isn't working for most Americans, almost all of us, in fact, right? And so it's impossible to predict which way this goes next year. I think, assuming that we have fair elections and that, we don't know what's going to happen with all the gerrymandering, Republicans are going to get their clocks cleaned. They are, because the trend in this country is, voting against the status quo, and it's going to keep happening until some coalition of people come in and actually like make working people's lives materially better. Like we have to keep talking that way. So it could, like, I could see the Trump administration tripling down and trying to get into like every place in this country. I'll tell you that like that is going to be a deeply unpopular position as the prices of everything continue to increase. I could also see them basically like saying, well, let's try to do some half-ass gestures to try and make people's, do something about purchasing power the next year so that we don't completely lose the midterms and have a chance of holding on to Congress. So I could see it going in a direction. I think what we have to do, and that's why I was so proud to like be a part of that press conference, is to stand up together and say like there is going to be resistance to this. Like we are going to like help our friends and neighbors out. And that's something, that as a union we're thinking about, and it's something that like locally, I think we should all be connecting with folks in this community that do good work, like COMSA, like Voces de la Frontera, so that we can be part of like standing in solidarity with folks.
And just as a quick follow-up before I pass it up to James, I always point to where people are on my screen, and they're almost never actually there. So just it gets a little strange. That is one like slight fear that I have, because you said unless they do something that helps people's purchasing powers, they're talking about those checks now. And well, I am not going to turn down a $2,000 check because this bitch needs a car. I do have a little bit of a fear that him doing that is going to make them go, well, so far he's the only president that's ever passed out stimulus checks to people, and he's done it both times that he was in office now. So
that gets flack from the conservative deficit hawk side, though. So that is kind of a fracturing policy. But
I don't think so. I don't think so though, because I just don't see them going like, oh, he gave $2,000 checks to everybody, including us. That's against our principles. Because how often have they compromised their principles in the name of supporting Trump?
Also,
this may be different, but
also the other thing you have to understand is that for better or worse, it's Trump's party. If Trump wants to do that, he'll do it.
Yeah.
And the Republicans in the legislature will, in Congress, will go along with it.
Fall in line.
Yeah. Yep. But yeah, but the other thing is like, I don't know again how well that translates in the midterms, at least, because it could be a few years from now when I don't know if Trump's going to actually leave office or try to do something to stand, but Trump's not on the ballot, and you have to remember that. And he can give out these checks, but that's not necessarily going to motivate people to vote for their local Republican.
Right.
That's something I think I'd like to get into more. We recently had friend of the show, Sean Briscoe, on, who political analysis, has worked multiple different campaigns for crunching numbers, that type of thing, and getting into the numbers about Green Bay, talking about how many people just voted for Trump at the top of the ballot and that was it, and didn't vote down ballot at all. I think was really interesting and speaks to him not being on the ballot.
Which I think helps us out in Wisconsin, because I think he said that number is like 3% nationally, and it really does not take that much to swing Wisconsin elections. So
nope, sure doesn't.
James?
All right. So I've said this a billion times before, but this will be the first time you've probably heard it. I think the fundamental problem with American politics is that either party could win pretty much an overwhelming electoral advantage if they just pursue a policy that legitimately, it doesn't need to be perfect, that attempts to make the lives of working class people better. And you can do that from a conservative side too, like your Orrin Cass type ideas.
Yep.
The problem is that neither of them seem particularly interested in it. So my question to you is, assuming you win your election and you get onto Green Bay Common Council, what kind of policies that make working class people's lives better would you pursue?
Yeah, well, James, I wrote a book about what you're talking about. So, yeah, I mean, so one of the things for me, and I've written about this too, recently, is I think when you have this clear gridlock at the national level, and I don't necessarily even mean partisan gridlock, right? I mean like ideological gridlock, in the sense that it's like, well, we can't like have some kind of big plan to just give people housing, right? Or we can't do a universal jobs guarantee because those are too difficult. Or like we can't do universal health care. I mean, we're in a position with health insurance right now where, like, I mean, I listened to Trump talk recently, and he said something like, what the Democrats want to do is just give big tax, give big subsidies to healthcare corporations. And Trump's not wrong about that. I mean, that was always the problem with Obamacare, is that, like, instead of just like doing something like giving everybody access to Medicare or some other kind of universal healthcare program like every other, industrialized country does, we're going to give huge subsidies to healthcare corporations. And arguably Obamacare, it's helped a lot of people have health insurance, right? I mean, that kind of fits into that like pragmatic paradigm I was talking about earlier, but it's arguably made our health problem worse in this country in the greater kind of macro sense. So I think there's like, for too long, there's just been like an ideological sense of that things are doing things, big social democratic reforms. And that's what I consider myself a social democrat, by the way, not a socialist. That we can't do those things, that it's too hard, we can't get the votes, or it's going to cause some kinds of economic problems, like based on very little evidence, right? But I think our political class at the national level, I'm saying, has been so out of touch with what people want. I mean, you look at where, and I'm telling you all things but I'm setting something up here,
right?
Even though polling shows that people overwhelmingly want universal health care, that people overwhelmingly believe that people should have the right to a job, that people overwhelmingly believe that people should have the right to housing. So if that's what's going on at the national level, my view of this has been, and especially when we have a national government now that's like overtly hostile to what's happening at state and local level, is that the local level is really where you can impact change. And, I had come to that conclusion a couple of years ago, which is why I ran. I mean, I'm busy, right? I'm a professor, I'm doing the union leadership stuff, but I also care a lot about Green Bay. And I've seen things really already kind of pay off here in terms of like setting some foundation. So the Equal Rights Commission report that we put out in 2023 that set really the notion that people deserve the right to housing, and that's something that we could prioritize locally. That if you change your frame of reference from being like, well, if we subsidize developers and maybe a few people get housing, that's good, to we have an emergency around housing, and we need to put every resource we have into making sure that there's housing here. That changes everything, right? And so I think, you know, we've done some really good work there. And I've gotten involved. I won't get into the weeds on this, but like in my own neighborhood, in terms of like fighting for like very basic things like stop signs and safe ways for people to cross the street. Those things matter deeply, and they build the foundation for bigger things. So at the local level, right? I mean, to me, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. If I picked my top 3 policies locally for this race, it's housing, housing, and housing, right? I mean, like there's other things that matter too. Traffic safety. You know, we're still not out of the woods in terms of like right-wing bad faith actors trying to criticize the integrity of our elections. Those are things that I feel like, from the platform of city council, there are things that we can do to really stand up to those things. I feel like, you know, making this really an inclusive city in a number of ways is very, very important. But I think at the end of the day, I knocked on about 1,500 doors when I ran last time, and the number one thing people talked about was housing, right? So whether it was short-term rentals in their neighborhood, that they were like, this is changing the fabric of the neighborhood. And of course, we know short-term rentals like take valuable housing stock off the, you know, out of the market. Whether it's, I mean, some of the people I talked to, there were a number of people where you just had adult kids living with their parents because they could not afford housing. And you think about the kind of pressure that puts on basically like 2 generations of folks. I mean, sometimes those kind of things make sense, but not when you've got one person being like, yeah, I would really like to get out and start a family, but I can't afford to. I remember talking to a veteran, a dad with like 2 kids, and he was like, this house is not like a quality place to live, but I can't move anywhere else because nothing is affordable. And so I think like these are things we're going to have to be creative around, given some of the constraints we have here at the state level, and we're going to have to continue to advocate for changes there. But you know, there are things in the work that I think could be amplified, like community land trusts. Like, I mean, I think we should have, and I wrote about this in the Equal Rights Commission report. I think we should be thinking about public housing. I mean, that's something that like has not been on the agenda for a long time because of the kind of negative connotations. But we have public housing here in Green Bay, and from what I hear, it works pretty well, and we should be doing more of that. It's an all hands on deck situation. So for me, when I think about that, and I think about being able to, I mean, like you can physically see that when there is more housing for people, you can determine whether, I mean, you know, in the labor movement, we have these things called SMART goals. There are another stuff too, but, you know, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely goals. With housing, you can measure whether you're successful, right? Did the price of housing stabilize? Is there more housing units available? And so for me, that's the biggest thing I want to prioritize. And I think there's a lot of stuff we can do in the next couple of years.
Yeah, a couple quick things. This is more for the listeners than for any of you, because I know y'all know this stuff already. But yeah, I think housing is a really, it's a good way to look at it. I haven't quite heard that before, but I have noticed like 2024, I worked for the Wisconsin Public Education Network. I did a lot of canvassing supporting the school referendum, like kind of like an apolitical thing. It's just a question of, do we want to fund education, right? I knocked thousands of doors, and you'd have people like the conversation would come around to housing even with that, because it was like I'd be, hey, do you want to support the school referendum? Somebody'd be looking at it, I'd be like, I don't know, is this going to raise property taxes? Because I don't want my landlord to bump up the rent again.
Yep.
And also second that, and you briefly mentioned this earlier, maybe you go into a little more detail about it. You talked about siding with developers, because I've also interned at Green Bay City Hall. I did an audit at the zoning codes, which isn't here or there, but discovered that, like, you know, we live in a capitalist system. Your developers want to make a profit. There's more profit building a high-end apartment complex than there is in building low-income housing.
Yep.
So you end up having to pass laws like a certain percentage of any new housing development must be low income. But it's not even that simple either, because you have to make sure that it's included in other neighborhoods, because otherwise, if you put all the low income housing in one place, then you create an area where poverty gets further stigmatized, and you can't really lump all the services in the same place. Which
one thing I'll say though is we don't have that. We don't have a law. We can't actually do that. That Minnesota, there are some places that have done that. And we did write about an Equal Rights Commission report, but you can't actually do that. So the stuff you're talking about, those are agreements with developers, right? Like if we're going to give you this tax subsidy, you have to agree to do that. I don't know if this is where you were going, but that's one of the things I mean, right? Is like when we're preempted from those kind of laws, we have to get people to voluntarily agree to that. And that means essentially like subsidizing developers.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't realize that was a subsidy because I read it in the code. So interesting. So late stage capitalism where you have to pay off people to do the right thing.
Well, and just more generally, I mean, it's, what we really, again, I was talking to somebody yesterday, I won't say who it was, but it's somebody who like really understands housing policy very well here locally. And, I said, what would, as I'm thinking about running for city council, or as I'm running for city council and thinking about, if I'm fortunate enough to win this time, what should I be thinking about? And, she was like, it really comes down to resources. It comes down to money. Right. And so like, I think as we look at the possibility of a Democratic trifecta in 2026, I think this is something where like, it's going to be very important that Democrats do some things like get rid of some of the preemptions that we have many of them were put into place by Republicans. Robin Voss in particular, he's a landlord and has pushed for things and to preempt local governments from doing anything probably because of his own kind of idiosyncratic interests. But if there are things we can do at the state level to get more, first of all, get rid of some of these preemptions, but also like we're sitting on a huge budget surplus, and I know we need to fund education, but some kind of like massive infusion of support for local governments as well around housing would be really, really valuable too. And the other thing, James, is even the high end stuff. And I was making this argument about the short-term rental stuff that I don't know how much your listeners were following this, but there was an effort. It came through the Equal Rights Commission. Alder Joey Presley really took the lead on it. He's awesome. You should have him on the show.
We will be having him.
Yeah, he was the first one I talked to actually.
Okay, great. And Joey couldn't do it, so I got to be the backup. I see how it is. But Joey's really good at talking about this and pushed again for this pretty restrictive ordinance for short-term rentals. And when I spoke about this at city council, I basically, you get a lot of this like, well, yeah, most of these short-term rentals are, houses that are $600,000, $700,000, which isn't true, by the way, but some portion of them are. And that, no working class person is going to be able to afford them, but that's not the point. The point is when those houses are on the market, it pushes everything down. So even the high end development, it's not a magic fix. We need to actually prioritize lower income housing too, but it's kind of an all hands on deck situation. So I don't think it's appropriate to say like our only strategy is like figuring out how we can subsidize developers. But if we can think of like common sense ways where like there's a Venn diagram where that works, given the constraints that we have, like I think we should consider it. And I've spoken in support of some of these developments at city council when it made sense.
One thing that I wish, again, I wish we had better local reporting around here because our news kind of sucks. But because one aspect of this that's been underreported, just like with the fact that like I brought it up a lot, but like Tony Weed could have been the only signature they needed to get that discharge petition going on the Epstein file stuff, and he did not. No, zero reporting on that. And on this case, it's that the pro STR side was literally circulating literature and handouts to their members that said, as one of the don't options, don't mention that you're out of state and just focus on your ties to the community of Green Bay, which is basically saying, lie out of your fucking teeth if you're not in Green Bay, because that's going to hurt our case. And that to me, again, is like, I don't know why more of the local news media isn't covering that aspect of it, but it's gotten plenty of play on the llama itself, which I guess is better than nothing. But as far as the STR stuff goes too, I didn't get to catch a lot of the meeting, but I did catch a portion that was hilarious and also maddening, which was when Brian Johnson got up there and said that the solution was to just build faster, which would have been hilarious coming from anybody, but it was especially hilarious coming from Brian Johnson, considering he's like it's his baby is the public market. So I really am glad I wasn't at that meeting, because I would not have been able to stop myself from saying just build the public market faster then. But that kind of to me feels a little bit like that abundancy Ezra Klein stuff, which is like, yes, sure, we do need movement on that stuff, as far as like, zoning laws and all that. Because I had specifically asked Brian Johnson when talking about the public market stuff, like, wait, we could be using this for like housing, a hot place for more unhoused people to stay in our community, since everybody has a problem with them staying in the one place that they could stay. And he was like, well, it's not zoned for that. And I was like, I'm not an expert, but I'm pretty sure city council does have some influence on zoning. So it's really weird for a city council member to say that something that he's working on himself as his like personal project is not zoned for a different use that could actually have it used right now, when he could also be changing that zoning. So it's like, it's just not really a question so much as just a comment about that whole, because that whole STR meeting was a trip on a lot of different fronts.
Yeah,
but
well, if I could just say, I do think, again, the STR folks who were, as you mentioned, very well organized, and it makes sense. It's politics, right? They're an interest group. Yeah. They've got a vested interest in, in some ways this idea, yes, like a lot of them don't actually live in Green Bay, but in some ways the question of whether they live in Green Bay actually doesn't matter that much, right? It's like saying like, we're going to take housing off the market because we want to open up, laundromats or hamburger places, right? Like,
yeah.
It doesn't matter why you're taking it off the market. It doesn't matter if you live in Green Bay, if you're owning it. It's that you're using it as an investment property, and we need all hands on deck to have places for people who live here to live. Right. That's the salient question, and it doesn't make it any less. It doesn't make it any less disingenuous to like make that argument that like, people who live in California, as one person zoomed in and really talked a lot of shit about Green Bay and like said there's no other reason to live here except for the Packers,
which isn't true. It's not even remotely true.
Of course it isn't. Green Bay is like, I've lived in a lot of places. This is the best place I've ever lived. I love it here.
Same.
And but again, the salient thing is, if we prioritize housing for people here above everything else, that's what it means to say housing is a right. If we do that, then it doesn't matter if it's 100 units or 500 units. Those are units that people here in Green Bay could live in. That's something that could lower the prices of housing for people, and that's really what matters. And so yes, if I could, I want to go back to what James was talking about, which is kind of the intersection between education and housing, because that's also really important. There's a great podcast by this, he lives in Milwaukee, but he's a professor at like University of Northern Colorado or something, named Derek Gottlieb, that y'all should listen to. Actually, you can find it on Spotify, where he talks about this referenda fight. I think it was in Waukesha, or Wauwatosa, somewhere right outside of Milwaukee. And I never thought about it quite in these terms, but when people vote for a referendum, they're actually voting to raise their own housing costs to support education, right? It's interesting when you think about it that way, right? That's what people are voting for. And it's in that sense, given what's happened with housing, quite stunning that local school districts win the referenda that they do. It speaks to how much people love public schools. Right. And James, and by the way, James, I think funding public education is quite political, right? When the right wants to like get rid of it. Yeah. But like the housing question, it absolutely, like, we also have to think about it in the context of like school funding, right? Like we need to publicly fund public education in a way that actually makes that sustainable. And then you won't have to have these local school districts having to continue to raise people's property taxes, and that will actually put less pressure on housing. So again, to me, and this is why I say I'm a social democrat. This social democracy means like making sure that people have all of the things they need to live good lives, right? It's basically like prioritizing economic rights.
Right.
And I think those two things have to be thought of together, and we have to do both of those things.
Yeah, I think James, I think that's one thing that has always been very important to me. I went to East High in Green Bay, which is considered, it is a low income, we had 70% of the population there that was below the poverty line and that type of thing. And the way that our school system is funded, the property tax based, funding and that type of thing, I think it was very visible there going to school there versus, some other places. And so housing, I think, definitely can affect not only that too, but then you think about like food deserts and stuff like that. And it kind of is like the crux of the intersection of many different social issues.
I actually, this is random different. I actually met Derek Gottlieb once. I went to the Wisconsin Public. Yeah, I went to the Wisconsin Public Education Network this last summer, and I just walk it. They had me. I was working as tech support, and I just walk into this random conference room, and there's this guy with Jon Shelton's book in his hand, just like praising it, and I'm like, wait, what the hell? Like, who is this man?
Where am I?
Yeah. And this is right after I wrote my capstone paper about the philosophy of education. So I went up to him.
The longest paper I've ever read, James.
Hold
on, finish the story though.
Yeah. So and then I go talk to him, and I talk to him about like Danielle Allen's ideas, and he goes, "Huh, I never thought about that." Then he hands me his business card, and then he never responded to any of my emails. But actually, I do have some more questions about education. But before we change topic there, I believe Dane has something he wants to ask about some more local politics stuff.
Yeah. So one thing I actually just found out before the show started, there is a vote tonight on the Common Council about using drones for first responding for like GBPD. They're sponsored by Flock, which I'm sure everybody out here is aware of, Flock, safety and that type of thing. But I was curious as to what you would, if you were on the Common Council, what your thoughts would be on that type of thing.
Well, I got to be honest. I'd have some concerns about it. There's been so much going on. I don't know enough about that proposal to like really kind of weigh in on it. I mean, it seems to me like from what I've read that, I think our police chief here is pretty good, and tries to do the right thing in the context of the community policing frame. And so just from the little that I read, it seems like this is meant to allow people to like allow the police or other first responders to assess the situation so that they can provide better service. I believe that that's actually the motivation. Now, the bigger question is, are there unintended consequences for that we should be considering, right? What does it mean to send out a drone when, you've got a police call and, there could be potentially unintended consequences in terms of surveillance. And so I think this is something that I'm actually interested to hear the conversation. I think this is something that should be considered very carefully. And my hope is that there isn't just kind of a rubber stamp to this because it's something that the police department is asking for. Because I think this needs to be very carefully considered.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just as a follow-up comment briefly, my concern with it is that so like we already have a mine resistant vehicle for the Green Bay Police, which I find absurd on a number of different fronts. Like in what situation are they going to need that? And my thoughts on militarized policing has always been that if you give them the toys, they're going to try to find excuses to use them because otherwise what's the point of having it? And which is kind of the case when they sent the police over to the No Kings 2 protest, and there were literally like 2 or 3 snipers up on the roof of the school around Joannes Park. And I again was like, I understand, like, it's theoretically for our protection, but at the same time, like, we had kids and old people there, so like bringing snipers felt like a little unnecessary, and it just kind of felt like a case where they have the snipers, so why not? And I'm just concerned that if we just give them the ability to use drones instead of going out themselves, it may just lead to kind of improper use, I guess. But I don't know. Like you said, I have to see more about the proposal to see what they're fully advocating there. But
yeah, and I think you know, we should be our primary disposition toward this should be skepticism, right? Like there should be a clear and compelling reason to do something like this.
Yeah, 100%.
I will say that one of the biggest criticisms of because I believe these drones would be leased through Flock. One of the biggest criticisms, these Flock cameras, they're typically AI powered, and what a lot of police departments have been doing is they're running AI transcription software on it, and because it's leased through a private company, it bypasses a lot of warrant requirements. And they tend to make mistakes too, where they'll like misread a license plate, and then some random family just gets dragged out of the car and held at gunpoint. So there are definitely some
AI,
serious,
not real.
there's definitely some serious concerns.
That's a good example of some of the consequence. Like, and I don't think our police department would be asking for that in order to purposely do those things, right? But those could be the consequences, yes. So I think there should be clear and compelling reasons to do something like this.
So, since we're interviewing all of the progressive candidates, it wouldn't be very honest of us if we only asked the super easiest questions, right? And unfortunately for us, Jon Shelton, you're a difficult person to dig up like any actual kind of controversy. Most of it that I can find is just like political shilling, like, oh, he doesn't agree with my politics, he's a terrible person. But
or looking like old gravy versus young gravy.
Yeah.
I didn't even make that connection. Somebody pointed that out, and it was funny.
Guilty of making terrible music, I see. But so I guess though, like the most controversial thing that you've had your face attached to lately is it seems like the AFT and the chancellor of the university are not getting along particularly well lately. Is there anything you would like to speak on that?
Well, sure. I mean, and I don't really feel like that's digging up dirt. I mean, I've said all this stuff publicly.
It's not digging up dirt, but
it's and also, who doesn't have a problem with the chancellor of UWGB at this point? Like, let's be honest. You may not be able to say the saucy stuff on that, but I can also.
It's not dirt, but it is like it's a controversial topic that you're involved with.
Well, the first thing I'll say is, James, I've never done anything wrong, so you're not gonna find anything. I'm a choir boy. So, all right, let's start with this. I was on the committee that hired our chancellor. We hired him for provost, and then when our previous chancellor left, Mike was really the best candidate. I mean, I think there were a couple more, but like, you know, he applied for the chancellor position. It was clear he was going to get it. I lobbied to hire him for provost. I lobbied to hire him for chancellor to the regent committee when they were doing the search. And I think our chancellor, as far as chancellors have gone, for the first like half of his tenure was a quite good chancellor. I mean, there were things where, I mean, he took over right during COVID, and I remember, you know, this was before y'all's time, but I mean, 2020 was just, I mean, were any of you in college at that point or no?
Yeah, I wasn't at GB, but I was in college.
Okay. So you remember what that was like. And I mean, it was real anxiety, and we had students who were, you know, graduating like that semester, because of course that happened in the spring. And the chancellor and I worked very closely. Our union, I mean, he wouldn't describe it as working with our union, but like, as the president, or one of the leaders of our union, actually Adam Gaines was president at the time, but as one of the leaders of the union, we worked very closely to try and do things that were student-centered. The Senate passed a resolution that I authored, actually, to basically help students navigate the grading, with very, very flexible grading. This is something that the chancellor really wanted, and it's something that we were happy to do, and there was a nice overlap there. he's done some things like he's been very faculty centered in some very important ways. Like a couple years ago, there was an extra pot of money, and the chancellor found a way to give it's probably 2.5 years ago now, give every faculty and staff member $1,000 stipend, right? And I personally told him, like, thank you for doing that. That was a great move. And what was good about it wasn't just that he found a way to give everybody money, but this is something that our union had been asking for, was when we get pots of money, don't give it to people as percentage increases. Give it to them as flat dollar amounts, because that helps people on the lower end of the spectrum more.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've really prioritized as a union. I'm really proud of our local, because that we've always had that kind of culture, and that's not the case everywhere. So, I want to start by saying that, like, for most of his tenure, I've had a lot of respect for Mike, and I feel like we've had a good relationship. What's happened over the past couple of years is that there have been a few different things where the chancellor has not, frankly, been responsive to the things that faculty and staff have been saying. So one of these is our local union has been trying to get a meet and confer relationship with administration, which means that we're not allowed to collectively bargain. Faculty Senate is for curricular issues. It means that the elected leaders of our union meet with the chancellor or his designee so we can talk about workplace issues. It's basic. I mean, every other public employee in the state, every other public worker in the state, aside from people who work at the university system, have the ability to meet and confer with their bosses, right? Like, and it's a no-brainer. It's not collective bargaining. It's completely legal. We know this. We've asked for it. Our chancellor continues to just say no. He's like, I won't do it. Now, he's not the only chancellor to do it. But if you're going to be a chancellor who's kind of forward thinking, like, you could totally do it, right? There's no reason why you couldn't. So I feel like that's damaged our relationship a little bit. The second thing, though, is, and James, this is the more recent stuff. In August, the chancellor put out a so-called white paper calling for some pretty dramatic changes to the university.
Yeah.
I won't go through all of them because I know we're a bit limited on time. But the most important, really the most important one, and the crux of it, the rest is not as important, is changing the administrative structure of the university from one where elected chairs of academic departments basically do the majority of decision making. It's a little more complicated than that, but in the interest of time, I'll just say it that way. And replacing them with directors that are hired by deans who are ultimately accountable to the chancellor. This would change the entire structure of the university and how things operate, because what it would mean is that faculty who know their field and understand the needs of students, because we're working with y'all every day, or y'all are not, none of y'all are students anymore, but working with students every day, they would be essentially like removed from the decision-making process. I mean, they still would have some input. I'm not saying it would be a complete like dictatorship, but it's less democracy. And like the last thing we need is to reduce democracy in a moment like this, especially when this has worked so well on our campus. We have a record number of students. My students are better than they've ever been. James UTA'd my class this semester. Like, our students this semester were so engaged and so good. And they've never been better at UW Green Bay. And so like, it's like, why are you doing this? Like, it's a solution in search of a problem. And there has been, I have not met one person on campus who thinks this is a good idea, aside from an administrator. And university folks, like we don't, there's very little that everybody disagrees on, but this is one of them.
Yeah.
We had 450 people sign a petition, faculty, staff, students, alumni. And so, we felt like we had to, because the chancellor holds these listening sessions and like has shown no give on this thing and on this proposal. And I don't understand why. It's like, we could, whatever problems, which are unclear, we don't know what these problems are. He just kind of says, well, things need to change because things need to change. And so we've got to do this. And it's like, there's without any evidence. And again, it's like, it's kind of like the drone thing. If you're going to make a major change, the onus is on you to prove why you need to do that. And then you need to like build the case for it. And so we felt as a union that we have had to unequivocally kind of speak out against this from the get-go, or we would get rolled over, which is why we did the petition. We just actually presented the petition to the chancellor last week at the holiday lunch, because there's a time that we knew he was going to be there. We were accompanied by about 25 students who were also interested in supporting us. We held a town hall about a month ago. We invited him to come, and it was a good faith effort to say, like, hey, make the case to our members. He declined to come because it was a union, basically. And so we had a town hall with him, basically with an empty chair, and had a very good conversation. And a lot of students were very concerned and joined us as well. So, there is a working group on campus now that the chancellor has agreed to create. And my hope is that this pushback will allow us to find something that makes sense for everybody. But if it doesn't, and he moves forward with it, there's, our union will be taking some other actions that I don't want to say publicly, but that will happen. We're not going to just be like, oh, okay, you did this, so great. And I think the frustrating thing is, like, at a time when we need real collaborative leadership more than ever, given that everything's happening at higher education, I think we feel like, as a faculty, and I feel really comfortable saying this on behalf of my colleagues, and these are union members and non-union members alike, that we've just been abandoned, that we have a chancellor who's doing things that he feels are smarter than the things that we value, and not listening to us, and really not showing the kind of leadership that needs to happen, which is really collaborative leadership. And I feel, that I feel really sad about that, because, I've been at UW Green Bay now. This is my 13th year. In May, I'll have finished 13 years. I deeply love the institution. Y'all know, you've all been students there, how much I care about my students and the work that I do. Like, I put maximum effort into that, into creating spaces where everybody can learn and we can learn really important things. And it's sad when you feel like the leadership at the top isn't fighting for that, and that it's all on us to do it.
Yeah, I mean, in the interest of time, won't get too into it, but yeah, I mean, we've all here interacted with the chancellor, and I'm proud that there are some students working with you guys. I know some of my former org members in STS have been helping with the petition and that type of thing.
Yeah, we need to do a UWGB episode sometime, because I have so much shit to say about all the shit that I know from behind the scenes, like when I got to work at the library and see the plans of the new library and that sort of thing. Like, it's insane.
James,
guys, I really do need to go after this last one. Okay?
Yeah. I was gonna say it's approaching 9:30 Shelton time, so I know you got to go. But
well, that just means I'll be late to the next thing, but I can't be too late.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think me and you would both agree that higher ed does seriously need some reforms. And I think, from as much as I understand it, I think some of what the chancellor is talking about seems to be intended to address some actual problems, but I don't think this is the way. Do you think that's accurate?
The frustrating thing to me, James, is that there's this idea that, like, faculty and staff at universities, like, are resistant to change. And I'm going to answer your question, but that's just not the case. I mean, we have done so many of the things the chancellor wanted to do here, and he was right about some of these things, right? And yes, there are lots of things that need to change about higher ed. I mean, very fundamental things. I mean, for one thing, we should be moving to a tuition-free model of higher education, right? That's number one.
Thank you.
We should we should double down on. I mean, again, some of the great things that have happened at UW Green Bay. We weren't always an open admission university. I think this was something the chancellor's pushed for. He's pushed for accessibility. I think it's a great idea. There are challenges for us. It means more challenges for our students sometimes, but it's something that I deeply support. I like the fact that our campus just demographically looks different than it did 15 years ago. I credit the chancellor with some of that. But the faculty and staff deserve a lot of the credit for that too, probably most of the credit, because we're the ones actually working with students.
Yeah.
And so to basically make this decision in the context of, like, well, I know what needs to be done, and and you guys need to listen to this because I understand higher ed, with the idea that, like, we don't understand anything, that is frustrating. So yes, James, there are lots of things that need to change. But when you have every person at your institution, aside from the people who directly work under you, telling you this is a bad idea, and you choose not to listen to that, that should tell you that something's wrong and that this is not the direction you're moving in.
Yep. And I just like to point out, as part of our wrap up real quick, that part of the higher education fuck up stuff really got its start under one very specific U.S. politician, who I will name because I name him every episode. Fuck Ronald Reagan.
All right, thank you so much for coming on, Professor Shelton. I know you're an incredibly busy man, and you probably have 2 full-time jobs that you've been ignoring to talk to us. So thanks so much.
We appreciate it.
Thanks so much. This was fun. And if folks want to support the city council candidate, I would welcome folks to knock doors. You can hit up my Act Blue and give me a few bucks. That would be helpful. And also help. I would just give a plug. I'm running with, we call ourselves the Progressive Six Pack. I'm running with 5 other folks who maybe you'll be interviewing. A lot of them. You've already mentioned Joey, but Alyssa Prophet, who's awesome.
Amazing.
Ben DeLee, who's my union brother. He's the president of the AFSCME local here that works in the Green Bay School District for the custodial folks. Jim Ritterbush, vice president for UFCW, actually works at JBS. And Tarl Knight, who owns the Charlton Theater and is running as Brian Johnson. So support all of us. If one of those folks lives in your district, even better, try to support them. And we're looking forward to building on the work that some of those folks who are already on city council have done and really pushing even further next time.
Oh yeah.
Yes, great to have you, and we'll be interviewing all of them in the future. But great show. Thanks for joining us, John.
Absolutely. Thanks, y'all. Take care.
Yep.